Well, good morning. This is Ian R. Crane. Oh, excuse me. It's early in the morning. Very early. And, it's 8:30. And it's the morning of Monday, 24th of June, 2019. And the title of this morning's broadcast is Donald, Iran, Boris, and the new Monica Lewinsky. Well, let's see how things have unfolded. Of course, this weekend, for those who have been following what's been occurring in the Gulf, might have perceived it to be a somewhat sort of condensed replay of what occurred back in 1962. Now, back then I just passed my 6th birthday, and I can remember very clearly all the emotion that was going on around me as the world seemed to be teetering on the brink of nuclear conflict, as Nikita Khrushchev was threatening to deploy nuclear missiles in Cuba. And of course, Kennedy stood up to that. And for 13 days, I believe it was, there was this standoff. And, it was a case of, was the world about to go back into global conflict? Well, of course, the rest, as they say, is history, because the official story is that Nikita Khrushchev bottled it and turned his ships around and took the missiles back to Russia. Of course, what's now been revealed many years later is that Kennedy entered into some very deep negotiations with the Soviets at the time. And in return for Khrushchev turning the ships around, Kennedy agreed not to invade Cuba. Of course, we'd already had the Bay of Pigs debacle. And Kennedy also agreed to remove nuclear warheads from Turkey. And then the Cold War endured for another 27 years until the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Well, of course, John Bolton and Mike Pompeo have been desperate to ignite global conflict. Certainly, Bolton believes that is his mission whilst he is on this mortal coil, and he's been desperately trying to do it now for at least 25 years. So, following the BS of the attacks on the Norwegian and Japanese registered tankers in the Gulf of Oman, which were, of course, blamed on Iran, but the only politician outside of Bolton and Pompeo and a certain Middle Eastern nation who seemed to have fallen for that story was none other than Jeremy Hunt. So you just know now that if Jeremy Hunt becomes leader of the Tory party, more of which later, then he is just going to be another Tony Blair type poodle to the US administration. Fortunately, sanity elsewhere in the world prevailed, and nobody was buying the Bolton-Pompeo story that Iran had attacked these tankers. But then Iran allegedly shot down an unmanned drone, and Bolton and Pompeo were ecstatic and probably orgasmic at the prospect of global conflict. Well, it's subsequently been reported that the US was indeed just 10 minutes away from launching a retaliatory strike against Iran when Donald Trump had an attack of conscience, reportedly. And he asked the question. He said, how many people will be killed if we launch this attack on Iran? And having been told, we'll get back to you, sir, unlikely, but that's the report. The response came back that it would be around about 150. And Donald Trump decided that 150 deaths in Iran in retaliation for shooting down an unmanned drone was somewhat disproportionate. So it's rumoured that John Bolton and Mike Pompeo were incandescent at that decision, because they had come within 10 minutes of unleashing global conflict, because obviously the moment that Iran is attacked, And of course, the likelihood is that it will be a certain Middle Eastern nation that is responsible, and those who carry out its proxy work. But if it had been triggered, then obviously Russia and probably China would have come into the conflict, and Bolton and Pompeo could have actually celebrated that they had achieved their life's mission. Well, one can only hope that, of course, with the advent of social media, while we still have access to it, that discussion and sanity will continue to supersede the insanity of the likes of Bolton and Pompeo, who basically both should be sectioned. Well, maybe, you know, this is the way things are meant to play out at the moment, to keep the world distracted from everything else that's going on and potentially coming. But again, more of that later. So, Jeremy Hunt, the only politician anywhere on the planet outside of the US and Israel who actually swallowed the myth that Iran was responsible for these two unprovoked attacks on the tankers. And, you know, Iran pretty much offered the same response as Saddam's foreign minister, Tariq Aziz, when he was asked why it was that Iraq had set all the wells alight in Kuwait in 1991. Well, of course, they didn't. But anyway, Tariq Aziz, being the statesman that he is, simply said, what benefit would we have got from setting those wells alight? Well, it's the same with Iran. Iran asked the question, what benefit would Iran get from attacking these tankers? It's cui bono. You know, who benefits? And it certainly wouldn't be Iran. And, you know, fortunately, even though other nations may have issues with Iran, they're not likely to ignite global conflict without serious justification. And the bottom line is Iran is never going to provide that. Iran does not have a history of belligerence, unlike, of course, the US, which has certainly become the most belligerent nation on the planet. But of course, in reality, it's actually a proxy on behalf of another nation. And that's why there are so many dual passport holders in the US and the UK governments. So coming back to the UK, Jeremy Hunt. Well, we know where his allegiance lies. But of course, he was very much second in the running to Boris. But events have taken a turn. And Boris, as a leader of the Tory party, is not looking quite so certain this morning as perhaps it was late last week. And this is due to, of course, the British version of Monica Lewinsky. And, you know, one can only wonder how long it is before the British press start asking the question as to how Carrie Symonds likes her cigars. Well, reportedly, the Boris-Carrie Symonds relationship is going into meltdown. And, you know, who can really be surprised? Because Boris, old enough to know better. And if he was 45, then, you know, there might be some explanation for his behaviour, you know, where obviously his brain lives in his groin as opposed to elsewhere. But he's not. He's 55. So he's old enough to know better. And, you know, one might conject that Carrie Symonds was manoeuvred into this position, probably a Monica type position, for the same reason that Monica was manoeuvred into her close relationship with Bill Clinton. And of course, the reality is, as the exposure and the scrutiny of this relationship between Boris and Carrie Symonds now continues to gain momentum, of course, the impact is going to be significantly negative in terms of Boris's chances of becoming leader of the Tory party. Well, you know, the choice between Boris and Jeremy, it's Hobson's choice anyway. You know, the bottom line is that Boris is manipulable, he's malleable, he is damaged goods, and, you know, the concerns that he could be blackmailed are, without any shadow of doubt, genuine. because the bottom line is he cannot keep it in his trousers. The brain, still lives where an adolescent's brain lives, or a 40-year-old guy lives. But he should have got through that by now. So Boris is potentially a problem. And, any pretense that he would deliver Brexit should be completely shot, because Boris, when he was Foreign Secretary, absolutely committed to EU military unification. So EU military unification pretty much means that Britain ain't ever getting out of the EU. Now, as for Jeremy Hunt, well, he's a Remainer. So one can see why there are the interests in putting Jeremy into that position. Now, Theresa May reportedly stated on no fewer than 108 occasions that Britain was coming out of the EU on March the 31st. Well, here we are on June 24th, and of course there's no sign of the UK coming out of the EU. And of course the promise is that Brexit will be delivered on October 31st. But, if you put money on that, then you're a braver man than me, Gungadin, because right now, the likelihood of Britain coming out of the EU on October the 31st is not only very slim, it's basically none. And if Jeremy Hunt gets into the role, then you can pretty much guarantee that we're going to see more Theresa May type obfuscation. So, the pantomime continues. And, the British are still pinning their hopes on the success of a court case being led by Robin Tilbrook. But it would be remiss of anybody to believe that there is justice in this country. So whether Mr. Tilbrook has a genuine case or not, the reality is that the judiciary will do precisely what they are told to do by the corporatocracy. And, of course, all they got to do is roll out the likes of Judge Michael Supperstone or Michael Snow, the whores to the corporatocracy, and they'll get precisely the result they want, which will mean that, Robin Tilbrook's application that Britain left the EU on March the 31st, will just keep being kicked down the road with no decision being made. The case will continue to be adjourned until the political solution manifests. So the reason all this is going on, of course, is because we let it. Because people are so bored with all the shenanigans, they're so frustrated with the pantomime, they just cannot be asked to get involved. And that's precisely what the establishment wants. They just want people to go about their lives going, can't see, hear anything. So, we'll just ignore it. And this gives them then the sanction to be able to just continue to lie, deceive and obfuscate without scrutiny. So, obviously, the leadership campaign for the Tory party now comes down to the Tory party members. And all I can say is basically, there's no choice here whatsoever. It's not a choice. I wouldn't even suggest getting a coin out and flipping a coin. There just is no choice. You have been delivered to Bilderberg Muppets who will simply deliver whatever they are instructed to deliver. There's no integrity here whatsoever. Boris has got Monica to deal with, Carrie, whatever her name is. And, Jeremy Hunt, well, look what he's done to the NHS. And he's about to do the same to the UK if, of course, he gets the opportunity to do so. But like I said, it doesn't really matter who's in the slot there. And, of course, there are also moves that once whoever is elected into the position announces that they are the new leader of the Tory party and then announces to Parliament that they are their de facto the new Prime Minister, there will be efforts to initiate a general election. And of course, at that point, the Brexit party will storm it. Except that it won't, because of course the postal votes will be used to manipulate the vote in constituencies all around the country. Just as it's becoming increasingly obvious that occurred in Peterborough. And in fact, I received an email following my broadcast last week from an individual who stated that he was a former member of the Labour Party, and that when he was canvassing on behalf of the Labour Party, he attended workshops on how to use and abuse the postal votes. And in fact, they were, in his words, disciplined if they didn't go to the nursing homes, if they didn't go to basically institutions and literally stand over people while they completed the postal vote, of course, making sure that it was for the candidate of their choice. So any pretense of democracy in the banana republic of the UK is completely shot. And whilst there are some newspaper reports about a police investigation into the election at Peterborough, anyone who expects anything to come of that is simply living in clown cuckoo land, because, yes, it will be in the media whilst, just to keep people placated. And then as soon as the time is considered to be ripe, it will just be conveniently forgotten. And the Labour victory, manipulated by nearly 10,000 postal votes, 29.1% of the total votes in Peterborough were allegedly postal votes. What a crock. So, are the people of Peterborough going to get up in arms about it? Are the Brexit Party going to get up in arms about it? Probably not, because it's all part of the same pantomime, just to keep you in your box and doing what you do to feed the corporatocracy. But, is it time for change? Yes, of course it's time for change. And, the good news is that increasingly people are taking an interest in what's occurring. And, in a big way, 5G is certainly helping to unite communities. And, we are now seeing the embryonic successes of the 5G campaign. Glastonbury, Stroud, Trafford, and something that I'm going to talk more about perhaps in a week or so, Manchester Airport, who are now suddenly realising that they may have committed a massive faux pas by allowing Vodafone to install a 5G blast pod in Manchester Airport. And it's now been brought to the attention of the Manchester Airport management team, and none other than the CEO of the Manchester Airport Group, that basically none of them did any due diligence. They just assumed and accepted that Vodafone had conducted all the necessary safety tests and got all the apparent certification that they didn't need to challenge whether or not these blast pods were safe. And now that they're realising that Vodafone certainly doesn't have any documentation, it doesn't have any independent studies which prove that the frequencies that it's bombarding the occupants of its blast pod with are safe. So consequently, the realisation that there may be litigation pending at some future point as people start to perhaps develop unexpected cancers and then ask, what did I do different? I know, I spent some time in the 5G blast pod at Manchester Airport. So this is how we have the opportunity to bring this 5G agenda to a halt, because this is carcinogenic, it's not conducive with human health and well-being. And once investors realise that coming down the road are potentially class action lawsuits as people question the safety that and the research that has gone into 5G, and they realise that basically there is none whatsoever. So, the 5G awareness campaign is growing exponentially, and later this week I will be announcing the detail of the 5G awareness tour that I've put in place through September and early October. And also, hopefully later today, tickets for AV 10.1 will be available, and this will be in London on the Sunday the 27th of October. And I can assure you that the speakers that I have lined up for AV 10.1 will truly rock your world. And, this is information that's going to be shared at 10.1. A year, 2 years ago, people wouldn't have been ready for it. Now there is a level of awareness that I think the time is ripe. So more of that later on, because I don't want to, I want to keep the powder dry, shall I say. Because I know what happens. Once I announce the speakers for an AV event, then everybody jumps on the proverbial bandwagon and, wants to bring those speakers onto their radio shows, etc., which is great. But, a bit nearer the time, perhaps. Anyway, I have to say that the weekend was great. I hope you enjoyed the good weather. I was actually at the Unearthed Festival in Solva, where I was giving a presentation on 5G. And had a very interesting hour-long discussion with a couple of guys from the local Extinction Rebellion group. And I have to say, thank you so much for the civility of the discussion. And although I hadn't mentioned that I was giving a presentation later on the day in 5G, it was great to see you come along. And I hope that I have triggered sufficient curiosity that you guys will do your own research, because the evidence is mounting, and this will definitely be on the agenda at AV 10.1, that the impact of the Maunder minimum, the reduced solar activity, is hitting agriculture right across the world right now. And so for the last 40, 50 years, the establishment have been preparing for what they knew was coming, for what they knew was a natural phenomena, and have done everything they possibly can to blame that natural phenomena on human activity. But hopefully, as more people do their research, they will realise the magnitude of the lies, the deceit, and the obfuscation. So, as is always the case, do your own research. And Boris, do yourself a favour and, really consider whether Monica Simmons or Carrie Lewinsky, whatever her name is an appropriate partner for a prospective Prime Minister. I think you know the answer to that. We know the answer to that. And unfortunately, you've probably shot your bolt in more ways than one. Meanwhile, you have a great day. And I will be back with you at 8:30 on Wednesday morning, hopefully to brighter skies. It's somewhat misty up here this morning on the southeastern edge of Dartmoor. But you have a great day and watch the pantomime unfold. Take care now.